If there's any doubt whatsoever why it is imperative that going forward, Democrats in the House do not pass a bipartisan bill until the human infrastructure bill, the 3.5 trillion bill, is passed. This particular interview give a perfect example as how weak Democrats have a tendency to acquiesce to the fallacy, acquiesce to the false notions of an economy working for just a few. Or, in effect, they support an economy that will just work for a few. I want you to listen to this, and then we'll take it on the other side.
Consumer prices soared 5.4% in July compared to this time last year. That's the same number we saw in June, which was the highest jump since the Great Recession. This comes after the Senate passed the bipartisan infrastructure deal, with 19 Republicans joining all Democrats. And overnight, Senate Democrats passed their budget resolution without any Republicans, moving quickly to get another $3.5 trillion in new spending passed in their second proposal, which could risk overheating the economy. Jason, what is your reaction to the new inflation numbers? And we're aware they're coming from last year when things were way down because of the pandemic. But let's be honest, prices are way up and people certainly feel it.
Yeah, look, last week we were talking about how jobs were way up. Today we're talking about how prices are way up. To some degree, those are related. The United States had a huge policy response to COVID. That policy response is creating jobs at a really rapid clip. It's also contributing to this inflation. Yeah, some of this is supply side, some of this is base effects, but we're seeing a lot more inflation in the United States than in Europe. That's because we did a lot more in response.
Congressman, the White House argues that inflation is just short term. But with the midterms just over a year away, those short-term effects could be devastating at the polls. How do you convince voters that Democrats have been good for their wallets? When you go to kitchen tables, all people are talking about are prices.
Well, first, to Jason's point, which I think was spot on, is people are back to work. And if you look at since we were during the height of the pandemic and where we are now, the good news is people are in jobs again. And I think we took smart bipartisan action, 5 bipartisan packages on COVID relief over the last 18 months, and it's working. Part of that, of course, is having its impact, and I think we need to be smart going forward. But if you look at what we did just yesterday on the bipartisan infrastructure package, Stephanie, Democrats and Republicans coming together, including 19 Republican senators, and we're going to see similar action in the House with a bipartisan support for a infrastructure package. That's also key to our economic growth, and that's why that also is very smart policy. That means making sure that we can compete not only with China, but that we have roads, bridges, tunnels, water, all the things that we need to actually grow our economy in the United States. And we get those shovels in the ground and people to work there, 2 million jobs a year. All that's going to help move things forward. And that's how we're going to not only win as a country, but I think the Democrats will win strongly in 2 years.
But that's not the only thing Democrats are working on, immediately working on another $3.5 trillion of spending. Jason, I know you're not a politician, but you were part of the Obama White House. Is Biden's economic team rolling the dice on inflation to get infrastructure passed, or are they not worried about it at all? That extra $3.5 trillion, that could crush us in terms of short-term inflation.
I'm not worried about that package in terms of inflation, Stephanie. Inflation is usually the Fed's job. The Fed has been assigned by Congress the job of price stability. They should respond to the inflation numbers appropriately to achieve that goal. If you look at that reconciliation bill, a bunch of that bill is paid for. It's spread out over time. Some of it will increase the productive capacity of the economy, for example, enabling more parents to work. So I think you should look at it and ask yourself, as a country, do we need preschool? Do we need paid leave? Do we need investments in education? If your answer is yes, then you should support that legislation. I would not worry about inflation for something like that.
There's a ton of really good things in that human infrastructure plan. But Congressman, former President Trump, he was Mr. Real Estate. He said, I'm going to get infrastructure done. He didn't. Biden just did it in a big bipartisan way. Are Democrats risking losing this massive accomplishment on the $1 trillion bill if you go too big with the $3.5 trillion behind it?
I think we should be voting right away on that infrastructure package in the House. I am concerned whereas I agree that a lot of the policies are critically important. I'm concerned about the size and scope of a reconciliation package, and I think we have to be cautious about that. And there's a way to do this in the right way, in a targeted way. I'm concerned to make sure that taxes don't go up and that we handle this appropriately. And I think there's a way to do that, but it's going to take us working together to make that happen. And you're right, Stephanie. Let's take a big victory lap, not just Democrats, but Democrats and Republicans for what got done yesterday in the Senate and what I'm hoping will get done very quickly in the House.
Well, what does cautious mean? Because your caucus wants the standalone vote on the bipartisan bill. But when it comes to the $3.5 trillion, we always point to Joe Manchin, saying he's the guy. He doesn't want the other bill. He doesn't like that big price tag. And people often assume that Speaker Pelosi has got all Democrats in the House on board for the $3.5 trillion. Are you? Would you vote for it today?
Well, we have a 3-seat majority in the House, and I'm talking to a lot of my colleagues, and I think, one, we need to see actually what's in it, the specifics, right? It's hard to say without seeing the details of what you're for or against. On a macro perspective, there's lots of policies that Jason pointed to that I think are right in helping people. But I'm also concerned that number is very aggressive. I'm concerned to make sure that if we do anything on the tax code, that SALT comes back to help Jersey and make things more affordable here in the Northeast. And overall, the tax picture concerns me, and I want to look at that. But that we're a long way away, Stephanie, and I think the key here is to be very smart and judicious how we do this. And this is not something we should jam through. And I've made my opinion with several of my colleagues pretty clear about that. The best thing we can do right now is vote on that bipartisan infrastructure package that came out of the Senate, bring it to the House. The Problem Solvers Caucus worked very closely with our bipartisan Senate colleagues to help get that done. And 20% of the GDP in the country runs through the Northeast. It's key that we actually have a tunnel that's not crumbling. It's key that we have roads and rails that work. That's how we're going to stay competitive with China and globally, and obviously how we're going to grow our economy at home. So let's take that big win for the country, and obviously we can take other steps too, but let's look at those separately.
The naivete of this congressman is astounding. First of all, saying that because you've gotten 19 senators for a bipartisan bill makes it bipartisan is a joke. Based on the polls out there, we know that the Republicans in the Senate do not represent the will of their people when it comes to economic issues, and so is the case in the House as well. So trying to fight for a bipartisan deal at all cost really means that you are not supporting most Americans. It's a fallacy that bipartisanship means what's best for America or what America say they want. Now, there are 5 points that I want to put out there. Numero uno. The inflation number looks high because it is being compared with deflated prices 1 year ago. It's great that Stephanie Ruhle pointed that out right up front. It's important. But Americans won't notice that if you have liars on TV not telling what Stephanie Ruhle just said, which is, in fact, that if you're moving from a lower base, the inflation number looks high. There is some inflation, but it's not really 5.5 or 5.4% based on where the prices were pre-pandemic. Now, there was a point that should have been picked up. Europe did less. Europe doesn't have as much inflation as the United States because they did less. And you know why Europe did less? Because Europe has a built-in, most of the countries in Europe, or just about all of them, have a built-in safety net. They have all some form of Medicare for all. They all have some sort of payment to employees not to work. So, I mean, they're not, they don't have the huge disparity among the kind of disparity that we have, even though they do have it as well. But at least the middle class and the poor are, for all practical purposes, able to maintain their dignity right now. If you look at Kingwood, where I'm at right now, there's somebody stuck in a hospital, or rather in an emergency room, because no hospital will take him because the insurance doesn't compute. Hospitals are full. And then, of course, this person likely went ahead and decided not to take the vaccine because you know who they are. So, I mean, let's be frank here. Europe is less inflation because, again, they have a good safety net. Now, if the 3.5 trillion, my third point, if the 3.5 trillion dollars for things that we need and that are overdue will crush the economy, that tells you our economy is ineffective and our economy is wrong. Something that we've been preaching at Politics Done Right for a long time. We need to make very deep structural changes in this economy to ensure that it supports all, as opposed to being what it has been very good for the last 50 years, and that is transferring wealth from the poor and middle class to the wealthy. And when they talk about tax cuts, it always goes up the scale. Let's be frank, let's be honest in the way we discuss this with people. Fourth item, a House Democrat saying they are concerned about raising taxes when those with capital are the least taxed is why Nancy Pelosi must not pass the bipartisan bill until the reconciliation bill is passed. Because many of these crooks in our politicians, many of these guys will go ahead and get that passed and say it's just enough. And hey, look at inflation, it's too high. Oh, look at that, we're going to have. No, what we need to do is make sure we have to hold them accountable to the poor. We have to hold them accountable to the middle class. And numero cinco, a Democrat saying this is not something we should jam through is naive and shows weakness after the middle class and poor have been jammed for decades. So folks, let's get real here. No bipartisan infrastructure bill until we get humanity taken care of, until we get that humane infrastructure bill that says, parents, we're going to help you take care of your children so you can go to work. We understand that our economic system has been a boot on your neck for decades. So now we're going to take care and make sure that we make a system that is not equal, but is more equitable and gives all equal access to success. Those who work get the spoils from their work. Those who are parasites and have been parasites for decades, it is time for you to pay. We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead, number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.